Part 1: The Devil's Exchange. What would make a father give his daughter away? Not to a husband, not to a doctor, but to an enslaved man he once sold another family to their deaths. In April of 1841, on the hot, suffocating soil of South Carolina, Silas Rutledge made an announcement so shocking that even the cruelest plantation owners whispered in disbelief. He declared that his daughter, Catherine Rutledge, a 28-year-old woman weighing more than 260 pounds, was being placed under the complete control of one of his slaves. Not as a nurse, not as a caretaker, but as her master in every way, except on paper. White society in Colton County was outraged. They called it indecent. They called it madness. But they didn't understand what Silas Rutledge was truly doing, or what the enslaved man, Ezekiel Cross, would do in the months to come. By November, Catherine's body had changed in ways no doctor could explain. 13 men were dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation lay in ashes. This is the story of what happened when darkness and desperation collided in the South Carolina Low Country. But before we go there, subscribe, hit the bell, and tell me what state you're watching from. Because this is where the nightmare began. The land of heat and suffering. Spring in Colton County wasn't gentle. The air was heavy, wet, and alive with mosquitoes that clung to skin. The Combahee River moved like black glass, its waters carrying the reflection of Spanish moss that draped from live oaks like funeral veils. All around, rice paddies stretched for miles. Men and women, enslaved, worked knee-deep in muddy water from dawn until the stars came out. Their backs bent, their hands raw. This was wealth built from human misery. And men like Silas Rutledge convinced themselves it was the natural order. Silas's plantation, Cypress Grove, wasn't the grandest, but it was large enough. 800 acres, 58 enslaved people, and a big white house that looked stronger than the man who owned it. Because Silas wasn't one of the true elites of South Carolina. He wasn't a Middleton or a Pinckney. Those families had hundreds of slaves, summer homes in Charleston, and children sent to the finest universities. Silas Rutledge was always on the outside, desperate to claw his way in. A daughter out of place. Silas had married Elizabeth Yancey in 1812, more for land and name than love. She died the next year, giving birth to their only child, Catherine. He raised Catherine alone, pouring his energy into chasing wealth and social standing. Silas Rutledge was a tall man, thin from constant scheming, with hair that had turned gray too early. He spoke with a sharp tongue and treated every conversation like a negotiation. Catherine, meanwhile, grew up lonely. Tutors taught her reading, writing, and arithmetic, but no one taught her how to belong. By the time she was 28, she weighed nearly 260 pounds, her body swollen from endless treatments prescribed by doctors for her so-called hysteria. She had fits, screams, breakdowns. 1 year before, she had attacked her own father with a letter opener, leaving a scar across his left hand. Society whispered behind closed doors. Poor Silas, cursed with a mad daughter. But Catherine wasn't mad, not really. She had seen something at 12 years old, something her father and his secret brethren had done. She had carried that memory ever since. The letter. On April 7, 1841, Silas opened a letter in his study. It wasn't business. It wasn't social. It was sealed in red wax with a symbol he knew well, a scythe crossed with wheat stalks. The mark of the brethren of the harvest. For nearly 20 years, Silas had been part of this hidden brotherhood, 13 men who gathered in darkness. They mixed European blood, rituals with stolen African traditions, believing that strength and wealth grew from sacrifice. Sometimes animal, sometimes human. The letter was blunt. Silas owed $12,000. Gambling debts, failed crops, risky investments, more than he could ever repay. The brethren offered him a way out. He would place his daughter under the complete authority of one of his slaves for a full year. Not as punishment, not as show, but as a genuine transfer of control. He was to announce it publicly, in front of other powerful families, and claim it was a medical treatment. His humiliation would be total. He would be declaring his own daughter worth less than his property. But if he obeyed, his debt would be wiped clean. Dash dash dash. The choice. Silas sat in his study, candle burning low. Bankruptcy would destroy him. The brethren could ruin him, or kill him, if he refused. So, like he had always done, he chose power over morality. Property over people. That night, he dipped his quill in ink and wrote one word, yes. Dash dash dash. The man called Ezekiel. Days later, another letter arrived. It named the slave chosen for Catherine, Ezekiel Cross, age 33. Skilled in carpentry and herbal medicine. Described as quiet, obedient. On April 13, a wagon rolled up to the front porch of Cypress Grove. Inside sat Ezekiel. He was tall, 6'2", with broad shoulders and a calm face. No scars from whippings. No bowed head. His eyes locked on Silas, steady and unbroken. It made Silas uneasy. The trader introduced him, as requested, a capable man. Your associates said this one was carefully chosen. Silas explained the arrangement. Ezekiel only answered with a deep, measured voice, yes, sir. He was given a cabin near the main house, away from the others. His duty, Catherine Rutledge. But when the sun went down and Ezekiel was finally alone, his calm mask broke. He pulled from his shirt a small cloth bundle. Inside was a scrap of paper with 3 names, written in a child's hand, Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife, his son, his daughter, all sold 3 years earlier. All dead within 18 months on an Alabama plantation known for cruelty. And who had sold them? Silas Rutledge. Dash dash dash. The devil's game begins. Ezekiel sat in the darkness of his cabin, staring at the names of the family stolen from him. He knew why he had been brought here. He knew the brethren thought they had chosen him. But he also knew something they didn't. This wasn't their game, it was his. And before the year was over, Cypress Grove would drown in blood and fire. Right finger to be continued in part 2. Would you like me to also plan the arc of all 10 parts, a short outline of how the horror unfolds so the story builds steadily to that fiery November ending? Part 2, The Pact in the Dark. What would you do if the person meant to protect you was the one poisoning you? What would you do if the only one who could make you whole again was a man you had been taught to fear? If you're watching from the South or anywhere else, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell me what state you're in, because this next part is where our story turns from wrong to revenge. Dash dash dash. Ezekiel Cross had spent years learning how cruelty sounded when it pretended to be normal. He had listened for the names the brethren whispered. He had watched for the men who thought themselves untouchable. He had let himself be sold and resold until he arrived at Cypress Grove with purpose burning like coals under his ribs. He didn't move fast. That wasn't his way. He was patient like a trap that waits for the animal to walk into it. 2 years of selling himself from one plantation to the next had given him time to see, to gather, to learn the small openings people left when they thought no one was looking. He learned which masters kept their ledgers in iron boxes, which wives hid illicit letters under mattress seams, which men bragged about secrets late at night after brandy. He learned the map of power in Colton County, and he learned the sound of the brethren when they spoke about sacrifice like it was a charity. When he pulled the scrap of paper out of his shirt that first night at Cypress Grove, Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, the names were small and crooked, a child's handwriting stretched into grief. Ezekiel had folded those names into himself and let them be the steady thing that guided him. Silas Rutledge had sold them away. Silas had made the choice. The bargain Ezekiel had struck by getting sold to Rutledge was not for money, nor for escape. It was for leverage. On April 14, he met Catherine properly. Judith, the house slave who had been Catherine's reluctant nurse for years, led Ezekiel up the dim stairs. The second-floor corridor smelled of camphor and old sweat. When Judith knocked, Catherine's voice from inside was raw and panicked, like wire being snapped. "I do not want more treatments. Send him away." Judith's sympathy was visible in the way she hesitated. "She has bad days," she whispered. "This is one." Ezekiel stepped inside and closed the door on the hush of servants' whispers. The room looked like a mind collapsed, curtains drawn against daylight, a fractured picture frame, books scattered like a storm had passed. There was a chemical sweetness in the air that pricked Ezekiel's throat, the bitter tang of mercury, the ghost of laudanum. Catherine sat slumped in a chair. She was larger than he expected, not only in body but in the physical presence of pain. Her cheeks were bloated. Her eyes, when she looked up, were clouded and suspicious. She reached out as if expecting hands to hurt her, then pulled back. "Who are you?" she snarled. "I said no more doctors." "My name is Ezekiel," he said, gentle as a key turning. "Your father asked me to help with your treatments." She laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Help. Everyone says, help." Judith hovered in the doorway like a question. Ezekiel closed it softly. "I'm not a doctor," he told Catherine. "But I know things about herbs and the body." Catherine's face shifted from fury to something that looked like hunger. "You are not from here," she said. "What do you know of this house?" Her words had a bitter edge. She accused the room itself. "They lie. It is easier than truth." At 12, she had seen something in the cellar, something she had been taught to fold into madness so no one would listen. That memory had been sharpened into a blade she couldn't sheath. In him she saw, for the first time in years, someone who might not look away. "When did you last go outside?" Ezekiel asked. "When did you last eat without laudanum in your broth?" She blinked, startled. "They say the doctors know." "What if the doctors are wrong?" Ezekiel said. He set the trap not by force but by suggestion. "What if you've been kept small on purpose? What if your condition has been made to keep you quiet about what you know?" For a long beat, Catherine's hands trembled and then stilled. Her eyes went sharp. "He is punishing me again," she whispered. "For remembering. For speaking." Ezekiel could have lied. He could have said he'd come at the request of somebody trustworthy. Instead he spoke the truth in a way that could not be dismissed. "I was sold south. My family was taken and died. Silas Rutledge sold them." Her laugh was a ragged thing. "Why would he?" "The brethren," Ezekiel said. "They value proof. They value spectacles. Your father thinks himself part of something greater." Those words landed like a stone. Catherine's memory, the faces she'd seen in the cellar, the smoke, the hush, rearranged itself. Rage sparked where fear had sat. It was not the wild, unfocused fury people had labeled hysteria. It was precise, civilized even, because it had been given a shape. "You want revenge on my father?" she asked. "Yes," Ezekiel admitted. "I want him to feel what it is to lose. But I cannot do it alone." Catherine leaned forward, the first motion she had made in a long while that spoke intention rather than pain. "If I agree," she said, "what happens next?" "You get well," he told her. "We stop the medicines. It will hurt. You will be worse before better. And your father will fight it. He will say you're sick again. He will threaten those who help you." She laughed, but it was different now. It had purpose. "How can you make me well?" "Not by magic," Ezekiel said. "By removing the poison, by steady care, by teaching your body what it was meant to do. By making you remember what you must remember. When you can stand and speak, we decide what to do. We can expose them. We can ruin them. We can make them beg first." Her voice dropped, hard as a stone. "They must know fear before they die." The venom startled Ezekiel. He let it sit between them. This woman, grotesquely labeled mad, had a clearer sense of the ledger of evil than many men who pretended to be civilized. Her wish for revenge was not the rambling of a broken mind, it was the careful, bitter arithmetic of someone who had been ignored. They named themselves conspirators that day. Simple words, but they changed everything. "If we are conspirators, use my name," Ezekiel said. "Tell the others I'm the one who brought the herbs. Tell your father whatever you need him to hear." But when the truth comes, he didn't finish. They both understood. Judith listened quietly in the hall that afternoon and then, slowly, she closed the door as if a wound had been stitched. Outside, the plantation moved on like a beast that did not notice the hand that tightened its reins. Inside, two people who should never have formed a pact did precisely that. Ezekiel laid out the plan in patient, small steps. First, detox. Stop laudanum. Flush the mercury where they could. It would take weeks, maybe months. Catherine would curse and cry, but if she survived the withdrawal, she might regain enough of herself to name what she had seen. Second, gather the truth. Ezekiel would use small work to gain access to locked rooms, read ledgers, listen to bargaining men in the back parlor. He had patience for this. He had practice. Third, when the moment came, they would not simply accuse the brethren. They would make the brethren prove themselves in front of men who mattered. They would take the instruments of power the brethren used, papers, ledgers, witnesses, and turn them into fuel. It will make them rage, Catherine said. They will come for us. We will be ready, Ezekiel answered. They had no idea then how many nights that promise would demand, or how many bodies would fall between their vow and the fire that would take Cypress Grove. But in the small hours of that first night, two plots braided together, one for survival, one for payback. Both were dangerous. Both were necessary. Outside, the Spanish moss swayed like slow breath. Inside, a plan began that would change everything. Right finger to be continued in part 3. Would you like me to draft part 3 next, where we begin the detox and the first suspicious deaths happen? Part 3, the night we took the ledger. What would you risk to prove a lie? What would you dare to pull from the dark so everyone could see the truth? If you're watching, tap subscribe and ring the bell, because this is the night the plot becomes action. This is the night they cross the line. The house settled like a beast digesting its pride. For 2 weeks, life at Cypress Grove ran on the surface like the rest of the county, polite visits, polite gossip, polite dinner invitations. Inside, things were different. Catherine walked the halls. She spooned broth into her mouth without laudanum. Her voice returned not as a tremor but as sharp, clean sentences. She read from her secret journal and Ezekiel copied every line into his memory. They worked in the open by day and whispered in the dark by night, sketching cellar plans, timing guard shifts, marking when the servants changed and when the gentlemen went to bed after too much brandy. They had 2 clear windows to act. The first was May 14th, when Silas promised to be in Charleston for 3 days. The second was the servants' night watch, a rotation of sleepy men who grew careless when they trusted the routine. 2 weeks of small practices had tightened their nerves. Ezekiel had rehearsed routes and exit paths. Catherine practiced walking in the shadows without making a sound. On the last night before Silas left, the house hosted another supper for a few close friends. The brethren did not always meet in public, but members often drifted in and out of one another's houses. There were extra wines poured and extra cigars, and a sense of safety that made men careless. Ezekiel watched them from the margins. He catalogued pockets, keys on belts, the way Judge Pelham and Reverend Crenshaw laced hands with each other and laughed as if the world owed them comfort. He watched Marcus Fanning, who bragged about a ledger tucked away in a cellar wall, and how he tapped his finger against the table when he said the ledger made men equal in sin. That was the name they needed, ledger. The men bragged about evidence like trophies. When Silas left for the train on May 14th, he kissed Catherine in public and waved to his friends. He looked relieved. The men rode away in carriages with cigars and whispered promises. The estate sighed. The house servants gave small nods and resumed chores, unaware that midnight would be different. Ezekiel moved that evening like a shadow with purpose. He traded his plain shirt for the work apron he wore when carpentry took him near the cellar. Judith gave him a look that held both fear and hope. She had been the one to bring Catherine to Ezekiel, and she watched them both with a mother's quiet prayer. Ezekiel placed a small herb satchel in his pocket, but his real equipment was patience and a plan. Catherine had one role: be seen in the morning as the obedient daughter, not the conspiracy's center. But that night she locked her door and listened for the footfall below, listening, counting, ready to be the outward anchor if anything went wrong. She had hidden the coded pages and the names in the hollowed spring beneath her mattress. If they were discovered, she had a story ready. Madness revisited. It was a dangerous bluff, and she knew it. The house went quiet at 11. One by one the servants' lanterns winked out. Only the kitchen boy, sleepy and young, remained near the back, polishing silver. Ezekiel waited until the boy stumbled upstairs to sleep. Then he went down. The cellar smelled of earth and old wine. It was colder below, and every footstep sounded like a secret. Ezekiel moved with the quiet practice of a man who had dug graves and mended roofs. He knew where the loose stone lay. Catherine had told him the line the mason had missed years ago when the house was raised. His fingers found the seam. He levered the stone free with a hairpin and slid into a crawlspace that smelled of dust and the ghosts of meetings. Beyond the main chamber was a low room with a table, chairs pushed back as if men had stood there recently to speak. Ezekiel's lantern threw slow shadows. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the brittle hope that the ledger would be there. He moved to the far wall and found the hollow. It was exactly where Catherine had said. A carved space behind a false jar of pickled peaches. He pried the jar away and there it was, a thick book bound in oilcloth and tied with twine. He felt his chest loosen. It was heavier than he expected. Inside, the ledger smelled of ink and brandy. Men's names slotted under dates, rituals annotated in handwriting he could almost hear like the scratch of a guilty conscience. There were entries that matched Catherine's notes. Dates when blood had been offered, lines about new members, with initials, and a list of expenses that read like the cost of buying silence. There were names of men Ezekiel recognized from supper. He ran his thumb across ink that had sealed reputations. He could have taken a single sheet, torn proof, and run. But this ledger was a net. It was not a single rope to tug, it was a rope that could hang many. Ezekiel unwrapped it carefully and slid it into the bag at his belt. He checked the doorway for the faint sound of boots. Nothing. He started back toward the ladder. The house was alive in the way old things are, creaks and sighs that could betray a hasty man. On the stairs, a board moaned under his weight. He froze. In the distance, a dog barked twice and stopped. Ezekiel's heart thudded. He moved like water, steadying his breath, and reached the cellar ladder just as a candle winked on somewhere in the hall above. Men's voices floated down, but jumbled as if drunk. He climbed footing by careful footing, the ledger pressing like a cold truth against his side. When he reached the bottom stair, he paused and heard something he had not expected, whispering just beyond the servants' quarters. Two names he recognized, Nolan the butler and Marcus Fanning, were speaking low. He stepped into the shadow of the passage, heart barely moving, listening. Pelham will expect to see the ledger tonight, but Silas won't bring it to the meeting. We'll fetch it after he leaves, Marcus was saying. We'll keep it here, safer. Ezekiel's skin prickled. They were already planning to move the book. If they suspected the ledger, they might hide it deeper, or worse, burn it. He had to move faster. He slipped past the servants' doors, avoiding the boys' snores, and slid into the moonlit backyard. Catherine had one job in the scheme now: be visible in the morning with no sign of something broken. She would be the face of sanity while the evidence moved. They met by the old willow, where moss clothed the trunk like a robe. Catherine's face was pale but determined. "You have it," she mouthed. He nodded. Her hands trembled with relief. "Now?" she asked. "Now," he said. They moved like thieves of dignity, the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath a basket of laundry. They placed it in the hollow beneath a loose flagstone by the servants' well, a place no gentleman would search. Then Ezekiel and Catherine took slow, public paths back to the house. In the morning, they would continue ordinary, Catherine in her chair, Ezekiel serving tea. But the ledger was now a rumor pressed under stone and the taste of it was sweet. What they didn't know, and could not have known, was that one of the men who had spoken in the yard had a slick, easy smile that hid a darker loyalty. Marcus Fanning had noticed a print in the dirt near the well that did not match any servant's boot. He had squinted at the moon and seen a faint smear of oilcloth string wrapped around something beneath a laundry basket. He had not looked closely then, he laughed it off. But in the morning he would remember. He would move in a way that would set the first pieces of the dominoes falling. Catherine slept that night in a room that still smelled of the laudanum that no longer soothed her. She dreamed of the cellar and of faces turned upward in the dark. Ezekiel listened by the door and thought of his lost family. They had risked everything for a ledger. They had no allies beyond each other and the shards of paper Catherine had fed him in half-truths. The house still slept, but the air had shifted, like a tide moving in. At dawn, the first ripple hit. Nolan the butler found a teacup cracked in the pantry and muttered about clumsiness. The dog paced and scratched at a back door. Marcus Fanning yawned through his shave and stared at his reflection as if seeing himself anew. None suspected the danger yet. But Marcus had not forgotten the print near the well. By noon, one of the small men who worked the fields collapsed in the yard, dizzy and gasping. A quick trip to the cook's pot showed an extra bottle of laudanum missing. Panic fluttered like moth wings. Within days, whispers would become questions. Within a week, one of those questions would become a dead man on Cypress Grove's lawn. The ledger was safe for the moment, hidden, waiting. But secrets are greedy. They have a way of clawing out. Ezekiel and Catherine had the ledger. They had a plan. But they also had enemies who would never look gentle again. Right finger to be continued in part 4. Would you like part 4 to open with the first strange death and the brethren's reaction, or would you prefer it follow Ezekiel's attempts to copy ledger pages without getting caught? Part 4. The First Blood. What if the secrets you tried to bury refused to stay quiet? What if the dead themselves seemed to rise in protest? That's where our story turns now. If you're watching, hit subscribe, share this video, and let's step deeper into the shadows of Cypress Grove. The ledger was hidden, but the house felt different. The servants whispered, the air pressed heavy, and Catherine felt like a violin string stretched too tight. Ezekiel had copied several pages into coded notes, always careful, always by candlelight in the quietest hours. Still, he knew, any slip could doom them. The first sign of change came 3 days after Silas rode to Charleston. One of the field hands, a man named Jonah, collapsed in the yard. At first the others thought it was heat, but the weather had been cool that morning. His eyes rolled back, his mouth foamed. By the time Ezekiel reached him, Jonah was gone. Ezekiel crouched low, listening for breath, pressing fingers to the man's neck. Nothing. Then he saw it. Dark stains at the corner of Jonah's lips. Laudanum. Too much. Someone had laced it into his rations. Word spread like fire among the enslaved quarters. Was it punishment? Was it warning? Or had Jonah seen something he should not? Catherine sat in her chamber when Ezekiel came to tell her. She listened, eyes narrowing. It has begun, she whispered. They're watching more closely than we guessed. The brethren suspects movement. They're testing loyalty with blood. But why Jonah? Ezekiel asked, fists clenching. Because his death means nothing to them, she replied flatly. And everything to us. It is a message. They want fear to settle in our bones. That night, Catherine dreamed of Jonah's body being dragged into the cellar, candles flickering as the brethren watched. She woke screaming, her throat raw. Ezekiel sat at her side, gripping her hand until she calmed. It was not just a dream, she said, voice trembling. I know how they work. They don't kill in daylight by accident. They claim even the smallest death for their rituals. The house tried to move forward as if nothing happened. Jonah's body was buried in the far field, unmarked. Silas returned from Charleston with new books, new wine, and new lies. He spoke of business with bankers and politicians. He did not mention the ledger, though his eyes lingered on Catherine with a strange mixture of pride and suspicion. 2 nights later, the brethren gathered. Ezekiel heard it first, the faint creak of floorboards, men's footsteps after midnight. Catherine heard it too and insisted they watch. They crept to the upstairs hall, careful in their steps, and leaned near the stairwell. From below came the hum of voices, low chanting. The rhythm made Catherine's skin crawl. They've brought him down, she whispered. Jonah. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He wanted to rush into the cellar, to rip the truth from their hands. But Catherine gripped his arm. Patience. If you fall, all of this falls. We must learn, not act. Through the hours, the chanting rose and fell. A smell drifted upward, burning herbs mixed with copper. Catherine pressed her sleeve to her mouth. Blood, she muttered. Always blood. When the voices finally ended, the house settled again. But the silence that followed was heavier than before, as if the earth itself bore witness. The next morning, the men at the table laughed too loudly. Judge Pelham dabbed at wine stains on his coat. Reverend Crenshaw's hands shook slightly when he reached for bread. Silas alone looked fresh, calm, almost glowing. Catherine sat in her chair, silent, watching them. Inside, she burned. Do you see it? She asked Ezekiel later. They have been fed by death. They are stronger. The ledger alone will not stop them. We must wound them deeper. Ezekiel thought of Sarah, Benjamin, and Ruth, his family torn away by Silas's smile. He nodded. Then we find where they keep the bodies. If Jonah was not laid in the field, if they took him below, we need proof no one can deny. That night, Ezekiel crept again to the cellar. The air was heavier, stinking of iron. He traced the same wall where the ledger had been hidden. But this time, he found something new, a trapdoor beneath the rug, nearly invisible. Catherine's memory had not included it, perhaps it was added later. He pulled carefully, and the wooden panel lifted. Below, a ladder sank into black. The air that rushed up was damp, almost wet, carrying with it the stench of rot. Ezekiel nearly gagged but forced himself down. The chamber below was narrow, carved straight into earth. Candles guttered in iron sconces. And there, stacked like firewood, were bones. Not just Jonah, dozens. Children's skulls small as apples, adult ribs snapped open like kindling. Some bones still wore scraps of cloth. Ezekiel's knees buckled. He pressed his hand to the wall and fought for breath. One thing shone in the pile, a silver cross, its chain still tangled in bone. A woman's cross. Sarah's cross. He reached out, trembling, and touched it. Recognition stabbed through him. Sarah's cross, the one she had worn the day Silas smiled and tore them apart. Ezekiel broke. Silent tears carved his cheeks. He slid the cross into his pocket and swore under his breath. They will burn for this. He climbed out and sealed the trapdoor, body shaking. Upstairs, Catherine waited. When he told her, her face went pale. That is our proof, she said. Bones speak louder than ledgers. But if they find the cross missing, Ezekiel began. Then they will know someone hunts them, Catherine finished. Her eyes glittered dangerously. Good. Let them feel fear. For once. The following days turned darker. Servants whispered of shadows moving in the halls. Livestock sickened. A maid was found hanging in the orchard, though no rope was tied above her neck. Silas brushed it off as madness, but Ezekiel and Catherine knew, the brethren was restless. Every ritual cost blood, and blood was running thin. One night Catherine stood at her window, staring at the fields. They will come for us soon, she said. The question is not if, but when. Ezekiel fingered Sarah's cross in his pocket, the metal warm from his skin. Then let them come, he said. We have the ledger. We have the bones. We have truth sharper than any blade. Catherine turned to him, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. Truth alone won't save us, Ezekiel. We'll need fire. And in that moment, Cypress Grove seemed to lean closer, listening, as if the house itself hungered for what came next. Right finger to be continued in Part 5. Would you like Part 5 to open with Catherine and Ezekiel planning to smuggle the bones and ledger out for allies, or with Silas discovering the missing cross, realizing the conspiracy has already begun inside his own house? Part 5, The River of Secrets. What would you risk to carry the worst truth out of a house built on lies? What would you give to make the world see what you already know? If you're watching, tap subscribe and ring the bell, because this is the part where the evidence leaves Cypress Grove, and everything goes from danger to full-blown war. When Ezekiel reached into his pocket for Sarah's cross, he knew it had weight beyond metal. It carried a small life, a single memory. When the cross did not lie where he had left it, he felt a cold that had nothing to do with the cellar air. Silas found the missing cross the next dawn. He was in the study, turning pages of receipts, when his hand brushed something on his desk that did not belong. He picked it up out of habit and froze. The silver was dulled, but the tiny engraving caught the light, the same cross he remembered glancing at on a woman who once passed through an inspection like a piece of cattle. His face went still. He set the cross down and stared at it as if it were a moving thing. Silas was a man who measured risk in ledgers and men. He understood immediately that a missing trinket could be a small thing, or the first loose thread of a rope that held his whole life. He did not shout. He did not storm. He called Nolan the butler and asked quietly who had been in the cellar. Nolan lied at first. No one, sir, he said. His voice trembled. Men like Nolan learn to lie with the soft practice of those who survive. Silas watched him and saw panic creep into the corners of the man's eyes. He pressed harder. If anything is missing, tell me. Now, under that quiet pressure, Nolan admitted he had seen a print by the well. He had assumed a laundry boy had been careless. He did not think to check beneath flagstones. By the time he did, the flagstone had been replaced and no one had been in the yard. Nolan's lie was small, but it signed a page Silas could not ignore. Silas tightened his jaw. He would not speak of the ledger, not yet. He would not call the brethren and make them tremble. But he would watch. He would order locks fixed, men questioned, and more guards placed. Fear is a slow animal. You do not kill it in a day, you starve it. Silas intended to starve it. Ezekiel and Catherine did not wait for a trap. They moved that afternoon the way people move when the last hour is nearer than anyone likes to admit. They needed two things out of the house: the ledger and a piece of bone, proof that bones had been stacked in the cellar like refuse. The ledger could convict men on paper. The bones would turn their ledger into a charge that no preacher or judge could easily dismiss. They planned to use the river. The Combahee snaked behind Cypress Grove like a secret path. Boats came slow, crossing to Charleston with goods, letters, and a few people who preferred the quiet way of moving at night. Ezekiel knew one of those men, Captain Amos, a free black ferryman who kept his boat hidden under a low bank and who had once helped a runaway woman slip past a patrol. Amos had his price, and his price was not money so much as the right cause. He hated the brethren. He had seen what their men did to folk who did not give them what they wanted. Ezekiel sent a note, folded tight under a stone in the garden where Amos liked to tie his boat. It read only, "Ledger. Bones. Midnight. I will be by the willow. No name." Amos answered with a single knot on the post, and 2 lanterns on the far bank. That night, under a moon that hid half her face, Ezekiel and Catherine moved like 2 people carrying a guilty prayer. They had rehearsed their steps. Judith kept a path clear by telling a small falsehood. She told the cook that Catherine was having trouble sleeping and would take late walks in the garden to calm her nerves. The cook, who had little patience for more trouble, nodded and pretended not to notice. Small lies smoothed large motions. Catherine wrapped the ledger in oiled cloth, then in linen, then more cloth. Ezekiel packed bones in an iron-bound box that had once held brandy. He tied them with rope and pressed the box into a basket of laundry. The smell of clean linens covered most other scents. They moved through the shadowed yard where the dew made the grass slick as a glass floor. Near the willow they met Amos. He was older than the stories said and his eyes held too many winter nights. He looked at the packages and nodded once, like a man measuring the seriousness of a load. "You sure?" he asked, voice like gravel. "For Sarah," Ezekiel said. "For my trouble?" Amos asked. "For the ledger," Catherine said. Amos's nod was slow. "You 2 cross my boat. I will not ask who uses what in Charleston. But if men come asking, I will say nothing." He set the lantern low and the boat breathed like a living thing. They loaded fast, the ledger first, the bone box after. Ezekiel placed the ledger near his chest and felt its weight like a heartbeat. Catherine climbed in last, her fingers white on the gunwale. They pushed off. The river took them like a patient eye. The boat moved in black water that swallowed sound. Cypress Grove shrank back into reeds and the house's silhouette, a white smudge between trees. The world narrowed to the oiled cloth and the rope's rasp. On the far bank, under a sky where a few stubborn stars watched, a small dock waited. Amos guided them in, steady as always. He took the packages and concealed them beneath crates of fish destined for market. "They'll think it fish until it's too late," he said. "I know a man in Charleston who will keep this. He calls himself a bookseller but he's good with papers. He helps folk who have no voice." Ezekiel wanted to stay. He wanted to watch the ledger cross the city and see the names burned on paper. But he knew the ledger needed to be hidden where men with fine clothes could not touch it. He had to return to the house and pretend nothing had happened. They rowed back white-faced and quiet. They beached the skiff under the willow and walked through the servants' gate like people returning from a simple errand. The house slept. The lantern in the study blinked once, then died. The world seemed to settle, less dangerous by a breath. Inside, they unwrapped the boxes and felt the truth press them like an accusation. Catherine touched the bone and sobbed once, small and sharp. Ezekiel put his hand on her shoulder. "It is out," he said. "Now we wait." But the river had not been a clean road. Marcus Fanning had taken a walk that night to clear his head and smoke the last of an expensive cigar. He had paused by the willow because something about the place made him nostalgic for danger. He had seen the faint scrape of the boat. He had noticed a small smear of oilcloth by the bank. He had not known then what it was, but something in him remembered. A week later, Marcus would see the ledger moving in secret and think it rumor. A week after that, he would take a friend to the bank and say casually, dangerously, "You ever notice strange prints by the willow?" Men with that sort of curiosity do not stop at one question. Men like Marcus do not know how to hold a secret. For now, the ledger slept under fish crates and the bone box was safe in a Charleston bookseller's back room. Catherine's memory was sharper. Ezekiel's hands did not stop shaking. The house held its breath. They had crossed the river and made a promise to the wide world. But promises attract interest. The ledger movement had begun. The first ripple passed through the brethren's circle by being simply noticed in a whisper. It would not be long before ripples became waves. Outside in the dark, a lantern winked on in a distant window at Cypress Grove. Inside, Silas sat at his desk and turned the silver crossover in his hands, thinking of prayers that did not help. He did not yet know what had gone out with the boat. He only knew something had been taken. He would find out soon enough. And when he did, he would not forgive. Right finger to be continued in Part 6. Would you like Part 6 to open with the ledger reaching Charleston and a dangerous ally being found, or with Marcus Fanning beginning to piece together the theft and preparing to strike back at Cypress Grove? Part 6. Whispers in Charleston. Some stories travel faster than wagons, faster than letters, faster even than prayers. They spread like smoke through a city's alleys, and before long the whole town is coughing on secrets it never asked to breathe. That was what the ledger became once it crossed the Combahee River. Charleston in 1842 was a city of contradictions. Its harbor bustled with traders from the Caribbean, its streets reeked of salt and tobacco, and its parlors glittered with wealth built on misery. Behind the shutters of fine houses, men whispered about abolitionist tracts being smuggled in under the covers of Bibles. Outside in the alleys, the enslaved whispered in another register entirely, of escape routes, of coded songs, of the night wind that would carry them north. It was into this city that Captain Amos delivered his strange cargo. The bookseller, Jonah Pratt, was not what he seemed. His storefront smelled of ink and leather, his window filled with hymnals and imported dictionaries, but his back room was the truer heart of the shop. There he bound letters for men and women who could not send them openly. There he copied abolitionist papers and slipped them inside sermons. And there, on a rain-slick Tuesday morning, he unwrapped the ledger and the box of bones that Amos brought. Jonah sat for a long time staring at the open pages. He was not a man who wept easily, but when he traced his finger down the columns of names, Samuel, age 8. Ruth, sold to Georgia. Hannah, deceased. Lydia, drowned, he felt his throat tighten. He turned to the bones and found them brittle as paper. One, a small wrist bone, had been sawn raggedly in half, as if torn from a body in haste. He wrapped them again, trembling. "This is no account book," Jonah muttered. "This is a death sentence, and not just for the ones buried in it. For anyone who holds it." Amos leaned on the counter. "You've carried worse." "Not like this," Jonah said. This ledger has teeth. If the wrong eyes see it, they'll bite to the bone." But he did not refuse. He never refused when justice came wrapped in peril. He hid the ledger in a hollow beneath the floorboards, then sent word by discreet runner to a friend, "The proof has arrived. But the fire will come with it." Meanwhile, back at Cypress Grove, Marcus Fanning's curiosity festered. Marcus was a gambler by nature, not a scholar. He had ruined men at cards and made fortunes in cotton speculation, but he had never cared for books. Yet something about the missing papers gnawed at him. He remembered the faint scrape of a boat by the willow, the glint of oilcloth. He had laughed it off at first, but then Nolan, the butler, let slip in drunken confidence that Mr. Silas had been asking strange questions about footprints and missing trinkets. Marcus began to stitch the fragments together. By candlelight, he sketched a crude map of Cypress Grove and marked the willow tree. He noted which servants had been restless lately, which ones whispered when they thought the master's gone. He circled Catherine's name with a thick black line. "The widow knows something," he muttered. "And if she knows, then the preacher's son knows too." He lit another cigar and let the smoke curl toward the ceiling beams. He was not yet sure what had been stolen, but he intended to find out. And when he did, he would turn it to profit. Men like Marcus did not see sins, they saw currency. The house itself seemed to groan with the tension. Servants swore they heard footsteps in the halls long after midnight, even when every door was barred. Judith claimed the cellar smelled stronger than before, as though the earth had begun to breathe. Once, Ezekiel swore he saw a shadow move in the well shaft, not up, not down, but sideways, like something waiting just beyond the stones. Catherine grew pale and fevered. At night she dreamed of Sarah Pendleton standing at the foot of her bed, hair dripping, whispering, "Bring them all out. Not just the ledger, all of us." When Catherine told Ezekiel of this, he took her hand and said, "We've done all we can." But the dreams did not stop. In Charleston, Jonah Pratt began to act. He copied 2 pages of the ledger and mailed them north to a trusted contact in Philadelphia, an abolitionist printer who could spread them like fire through pamphlets. He sent the bones to a doctor, asking for a signed statement confirming they were human remains. And he began drafting his own essay, titled, "The Hidden Cost of Cypress Grove." But he was not careful enough. Charleston was full of men loyal to the Brethren, some for money, some for fear. One evening, a man in a dark coat stood outside Jonah's shop, watching the lamplight through the shutters. The man carried no book, no package, only silence. He lingered an hour before melting back into the crowd. The next day, Jonah found a single note slid under his door. It read, "Return what is not yours, or the river will take you too." He did not tell Amos. He did not stop his work. But the shadows in his shop felt thicker after that, as if someone were always standing just out of sight. Back at Cypress Grove, Marcus made his move. He cornered Catherine in the garden, all charm and menace. "You take such long walks these nights," he said, puffing smoke into the damp air. "Almost as if you're carrying something heavy." She stiffened, but kept her voice calm. "I walk because the air is clearer outside than inside." Marcus smiled thinly. "Clearer, yes. Unless one happens to stumble upon boats moving by moonlight. Unless one happens to notice laundry baskets that don't smell quite right." Her blood went cold. He leaned close. "Tell me, Mrs. Pendleton, what would your fine brother-in-law Silas say if he knew you were sneaking about with the preacher's boy? Shall I tell him, or shall we strike our own bargain first?" Catherine's hands shook, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You know nothing, Marcus." But Marcus knew enough, and he was patient. He would let his suspicion ripen until it could be harvested for power. The horror was no longer buried in the cellar. It had seeped into the river, into Charleston's alleys, into Marcus Fanning's smile. The ledger was loose in the world, but so were the men who would kill to reclaim it. And as autumn deepened, Cypress Grove began to creak under the weight of its own ghosts. Some nights the servants whispered they heard a child's laughter echoing from the locked cellar. Other nights, the well water rose higher than it should, as if swollen with things that had no business surfacing. The dead, it seemed, were not content to remain in ledgers or bones. They were restless. They wanted their story finished. Right finger to be continued in Part 7. Would you like me to make Part 7 focus more on Charleston, the ledger spreading like wildfire and attracting dangerous allies, or back at Cypress Grove, where Marcus starts tightening his trap and the supernatural horrors finally manifest fully in the house? Part 7, The House That Would Not Sleep. Charleston was a city that hummed even at midnight. Carriages rattled over cobblestones, the smell of rice and fish clung to the damp air, and from the taverns came bursts of fiddle music. But in a narrow street near the wharf, one little shop had grown unnaturally quiet. Jonah Pratt's bookstore no longer rang with the tap of the binding press. No boys came in with letters to post, no sailors slipped him folded pamphlets. The door was locked, the windows were shuttered. To passers-by, it looked abandoned. But inside, Jonah was alive, barely. He had not slept in 2 days. His eyes were red, his hands ink-stained. The ledger lay open on his desk, its pages glowing in the lamplight like an open wound. Sometimes, when he stared too long, he swore the ink shifted on the page. That the names whispered, that the margins darkened with stains that looked too much like blood. The note left under his door haunted him, "Return what is not yours, or the river will take you too." Each night he checked the locks twice. Each night he heard footsteps outside, then silence. He prayed the Philadelphia packet had already sailed with his copies. If not, he had risked everything for nothing. Back in Carleton County, Cypress Grove was unraveling. The house creaked as if it were breathing. Doors swelled against their frames. Shadows seemed to crawl along the ceilings. The servants whispered that the well water smelled of iron, that when they drew it, sometimes it shimmered red in the pail. Ezekiel tried to keep order, but he saw it too. He saw Catherine waking in the night, clutching her throat as if invisible hands had pressed down. He saw the mirrors in her room fog without heat. He heard, more than once, the faint sound of a child weeping beneath the floorboards. "The house don't want peace," Judith told him one morning, her hands trembling as she peeled potatoes. "It wants justice. You can't hush bones with hymns." He didn't answer, because he knew she was right. Marcus Fanning prowled the halls with a predator's patience. He had not pressed Catherine again after their garden conversation. He simply lingered in her path, by the stairwell, in the parlor, in the garden. He always smiled, but the smile was worse than anger. It meant he was waiting, biding time, watching. Catherine hated him, hated the way his eyes flicked to Ezekiel as if measuring chains. Hated the way he praised Silas with false loyalty while storing up secrets for his own profit. But she knew enough to keep quiet. At night, she pored over her coded journals with Ezekiel, tracing her memories of the cellar. "The ledger was only part of it," she whispered. "There are other relics, tokens from the rituals. I remember jars of ashes, strange tools, even a mask. They keep it all, Ezekiel. If we could bring it out, no one could deny." Ezekiel stared at her thin, pale face, lit by candlelight. "We already risked everything with the ledger. More proof means more danger." She touched his hand. "Danger is all we have left. If we stop now, we will have nothing but ghosts. And the ghosts, it seemed, were listening." One night, Ezekiel woke to the sound of scratching. At first he thought it was rats in the walls, but when he sat up, he realized it came from the window. Slowly, he crossed the room. The moon was full, the glass was pale with light. On the inside of the pane were words traced in condensation. "We remember." He stumbled back, heart hammering. The writing faded before his eyes, leaving only clean glass and the reflection of his own face. Meanwhile in Charleston, Jonah's fears came true. The men who followed him finally struck. 2 of them, dressed like dock laborers, pushed through his shop door near dawn. Jonah fought. He swung the heavy ledger like a club, knocking one man to the floor. But the other drew a knife and slashed across Jonah's arm. Blood spilled onto the ledger's page. The attacker froze. Both men did. They swore they saw the ink writhe under the blood, saw the names on the page darken and sink as if into water. Then came a sound, faint, but unmistakable. A child's laugh. From the book. The men fled in terror, leaving Jonah bleeding on the floor. He pressed his wound, shaking, staring at the ledger. The blood had vanished, but in its place, across the page, a new line of ink had appeared. Jonah Pratt, October 1842. His own name, his own death already written. Back at Cypress Grove, Silas Rutledge prepared for another journey to Charleston. Catherine and Ezekiel watched from an upstairs window as the carriage rolled away, wheels crunching on the gravel. "This is our chance," Catherine whispered. But Ezekiel hesitated. The house was restless, the servants fearful, Marcus prowling. He felt the weight of every decision pressing down. He thought of Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He thought of Catherine's trembling hand in his. "The cellar," she said again, her voice fierce despite her weakness. "While he is gone, we go down. We bring out what's left. We end this." Her eyes glittered in the dim light, half hope, half madness. Ezekiel nodded slowly. "Yes, miss," he said. "But if we go down there, we may not come back the same." That night the house would not sleep. Catherine lay awake listening to the groans of timbers, the hiss of the wind down the chimney. At midnight, she heard the sound again, footsteps in the hall. Slow, heavy, she rose and opened her door. The corridor was empty, but the floor was damp, as if someone had walked it dripping from the river. Ezekiel, too, lay awake. He dreamed of the ledger though he had never touched it. In the dream, it lay open on a table. Each page was a mouth. Each name was a cry. And behind it all, a chorus of voices whispered, "Bring us out, bring us into the light." When he awoke, his hands were shaking. He knew what they had to do. The cellar waited. But Marcus Fanning was already moving. That same night, he wrote a letter in his study by candlelight. He wrote to Judge Pelham, to Reverend Crenshaw, to Benjamin Lyle of the bank. He told them, "Something has been taken from Cypress Grove. Something dangerous. I know who holds it. If you want to protect what we built, come at once." He sealed the letter with wax, smiling. By the time Silas returned from Charleston, Marcus intended to hold every secret in his hand. The noose was tightening. The ledger was bleeding. The dead were stirring. And beneath the floorboards of Cypress Grove, the cellar yawned open like the throat of a waiting grave. Right finger to be continued in Part 8. Do you want Part 8 to focus on the cellar descent itself, a terrifying exploration, with supernatural horrors manifesting, or on Marcus and the brethren closing in to trap Catherine and Ezekiel before they reach the cellar? Part 8. Into the cellar. The night Silas left for Charleston, Cypress Grove grew too quiet. Even the crickets outside had hushed, as if the whole countryside was holding its breath. Ezekiel waited until the house had gone still. Catherine met him in the hallway, a shawl around her shoulders, her face pale but determined. She carried a small lantern. Its light trembled with her hands. "Are you ready?" she whispered. "No," Ezekiel admitted. "But we're going anyway." Judith had given them the cellar key before retiring, muttering a prayer under her breath. "God watch you," she said. "But he don't often go down where you're headed." They descended the servants' stairwell, the lantern's glow sliding over brick walls slick with damp. The air grew colder the deeper they went. By the time they reached the cellar door, Catherine's breath smoked white. Ezekiel unlocked it. The hinges groaned. The first chamber was what any plantation cellar might be: barrels of rice, salted pork, dusty bottles of Madeira. But beyond, behind a rack of wine casks, was another door. This one was iron. Catherine pressed her palm against it. "This is where it begins." The key scraped in the lock. The door swung open. The hidden chamber was no storage room. It was a temple. Black candles melted onto stone sconces. Symbols were carved into the walls, some so old the edges had worn smooth. The smell hit them first: iron, smoke, and something that might have been burned hair. On the far wall hung a mask, long-nosed and grinning, fashioned from animal bone. Below it, an altar blackened with old stains. Ezekiel didn't need a doctor's eye to know it was blood. Catherine held tighter to the lantern. "This is what I saw when I was 12. Her voice shook. "They brought me here. Said if I spoke of it again, they would put me on that altar too." Ezekiel clenched his fists. "We get what we came for and leave." Behind the altar, Catherine found the panel she remembered. She pressed, and a section of wall shifted open. Inside was a narrow passage leading deeper underground. The air that rushed out was colder still, carrying a smell that turned Ezekiel's stomach: rot, wet stone, and something sour. They pushed on. The lantern flickered, struggling against the dark. At the end of the passage was a small room lined with shelves. Jars filled with gray ash. Bundles of cloth stiff with old stains. Bones, carefully arranged, as if catalogued. And on a central pedestal, the ledger. It was thicker than Ezekiel expected. Bound in cracked leather, the page is yellow but alive with ink. When the lantern light touched it, the writing seemed to move. Catherine reached first, but Ezekiel caught her hand. "Let me." He lifted the book. It was heavier than it should have been, as if carrying not paper but every soul written inside. The moment he touched it, a rush of voices filled his head, wails, whispers, prayers. His knees buckled. "Ezekiel." Catherine caught him, steadying the lantern. "What's happening?" He forced himself upright, clutching the book to his chest. "They're in here. All of them. Everyone who died down here." As if to prove him right, the jars on the shelves rattled. One toppled, spilling ash across the floor. The ash moved. It coiled, forming the outline of a hand reaching upward. Catherine stumbled back. "We need to go. Now. Dash dash dash." They fled back through the passage, ledger in Ezekiel's grip. The walls groaned. A sound rose behind them, not footsteps, not exactly, but something dragging, scraping, following. By the time they reached the altar chamber, the black candles had lit themselves. Flames bent toward them as they ran. At the iron door, Ezekiel shoved Catherine through first, then slammed it shut behind them. The noise on the other side stopped, but only for a moment. Then came a single, hollow knock. Catherine trembled. What was that? Ezekiel swallowed. "Something that doesn't want us leaving with this book." Dash dash dash. They made it back to Catherine's room before dawn. Ezekiel dropped the ledger on her desk. The cover throbbed faintly in the lantern light, as though alive. Catherine flipped it open with careful hands. Page after page was filled with names, dates, descriptions of rituals. Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, Marcus Fanning, even Silas Rutledge himself. Each entry was signed in blood-red ink. "This is it," she whispered. "This is everything." But as she turned to the most recent page, her breath caught. Her own name was there. Catherine Rutledge, April 1842. Ezekiel leaned closer. The line was unfinished. The ink trailed off, as if waiting. "For what?" Catherine whispered. "For them to kill me. Or for me to finish it myself." Before Ezekiel could answer, a new line of ink bled across the page. Slowly, letter by letter. Ezekiel Holt, April 1842. His heart stopped. "It knows us." The lantern sputtered. A wind rose though no window was open. And from the floorboards beneath them came the sound of weeping children. Dash dash dash. That same night, miles away in Charleston, Jonah Pratt sat in his shop binding the last of his pamphlets. His wounded arm throbbed, but his work was nearly done. Then the ledger on his desk shivered. Pages turned on their own until stopping on a new entry. His blood froze. Catherine Rutledge, Ezekiel Holt. He backed away, but the ledger's cover slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. The lamp went out, and in the darkness, Jonah heard a whisper not from the street, not from the river, but from inside his skull. "They will not escape. Neither will you." Dash dash dash. Back at Cypress Grove, Catherine closed the book, her face white as chalk. "We've crossed a line. We can't put it back. We can't undo this." Ezekiel nodded, jaw tight. "Then we finish it. We bring it into the light. Whatever comes, we finish it." But in the hallway outside, Marcus Fanning was listening. He had followed them, quiet as a shadow. And when he slipped away into the night, he carried more than suspicion. He carried proof. The brethren would know by morning. Dash dash dash. The cellar had given up its secrets. But it had not given them freely. And now the house itself was awake. Right finger to be continued in Part 9. Would you like Part 9 to show the brethren's direct move against Ezekiel and Catherine, a violent confrontation in the house, or lean harder into the supernatural backlash of the ledger, ghosts and curses breaking loose? Part 9, The Brethren Strike. The morning after Catherine and Ezekiel found the ledger, Cypress Grove Plantation no longer felt like a house. It felt like a trap. The air was wrong, thicker, damp as if the swamp had seeped inside. Shadows lingered in the corners even when sunlight poured through the windows. Doors groaned when opened, floors creaked when no one walked. Catherine sat at her desk, the ledger closed but pulsing faintly, as though the book itself was breathing. "They know," she whispered. "I feel it. The brethren know we touched it." Ezekiel, pacing, kept glancing at the door. Marcus Fanning saw us. He'll tell them. As if to confirm it, a rider galloped past the front gates at full speed. By nightfall, the others would gather. That evening, the plantation filled with an uneasy silence. Judith clutched her rosary, whispering prayers too quickly to make sense. Even the field hands kept looking toward the house, sensing something heavy in the air. After dark, a carriage rolled up the drive. Then another, and another. By midnight, 6 stood before the great house. Judge Pelham, Reverend Crenshaw, Marcus Fanning, Benjamin Lyle, Colonel Treadwell, and at the center of them all, Silas Rutledge, returned from Charleston days early. They came not as neighbors but as predators circling prey. Ezekiel and Catherine watched from her upstairs window as the men entered the house. Their boots echoed like hammers. Their voices carried, low but sharp. "We were told the ledger was disturbed," Pelham said. "Your daughter," Crenshaw added softly, "has been speaking too freely. And this slave," Marcus hissed, "has poisoned her mind." Silas's reply was flat. "I will deal with them both. Tonight." Catherine's fingers dug into Ezekiel's arm. "They mean to kill us. Then we strike first," he said. The confrontation came sooner than expected. At the bottom of the stairs, Silas called up, "Catherine, come down." His voice was smooth, calm. Too calm. Ezekiel shook his head. "Don't." But Catherine surprised him. She straightened her dress, lifted her chin, and stepped into the hallway. "I'll face him," she whispered. "If we hide, they'll burn this house with us inside." She descended slowly, the lantern light from below throwing monstrous shadows of the men waiting. Silas stood at the base, his face carved from stone. "My daughter," he said, "you've been unwell for years. Now you've involved yourself with this slave. You've opened doors that were never meant for you. But I can still save you. Repent. Hand me the book." Catherine's laugh was brittle. "You poisoned me for 16 years. You made me your prisoner. And now you think I'll kneel? No, Father, I'll see you rot." The brethren stirred uneasily. Marcus Fanning's lip curled. "She knows too much. We end it now." Before anyone moved, the house itself answered. The walls shuddered. Candles blew out. From the cellar below came a sound like chains being dragged across stone. Judge Pelham spun, pale. What in God's name? The ledger, still upstairs in Catherine's room, had opened itself. Pages turned violently, names glowing red. The ink bled down the paper, pooling on the floorboards like fresh blood. Ezekiel grabbed Catherine's wrist, pulling her back up the stairs. "We can't fight them and that thing both. We get out." But the brethren followed, boots pounding up the staircase. Silas shouted after them, his voice breaking for the first time. "Do not let them leave with it. The ledger belongs to us." The house groaned again. Plaster cracked. A portrait of Elizabeth Rutledge, Catherine's mother, crashed to the floor. For an instant, Ezekiel swore the painted eyes rolled in their sockets to watch him. They burst into Catherine's room just as the ledger snapped shut. Its leather cover smoked faintly. Catherine grabbed it. "We can't leave it. It won't let us." Ezekiel lifted the lantern and turned. Judge Pelham was in the doorway, pistol raised. "Give me the book, slave." Ezekiel hurled the lantern. Fire splashed across the wall. Pelham cursed, stumbling back. Catherine and Ezekiel shoved past him, racing toward the servants' stairwell. Downstairs, Reverend Crenshaw blocked their path, chanting words not from any Bible but from something far older. His hands were red, slick as if dipped in blood. Catherine snarled, "I remember you. You were the one who held me down." The lights flickered. Ezekiel swung a chair into Crenshaw, breaking his chant. They fled into the night, the ledger clutched tight. But outside was worse. The oaks surrounding the house swayed without wind. The Spanish moss writhed like living hair. The Combahee River, far beyond the fields, roared loud enough to shake the earth. And from the cellar windows below, faces pressed against the glass. Dozens of them, hollow-eyed, mouths moving soundlessly. The dead, or what remained of them, trying to climb free. Catherine staggered, clutching her head. "They're in my mind. They're calling me." Ezekiel gripped her shoulders. Don't listen. They belong to the brethren, not you. Behind them, Silas and the men poured from the house. Silas's pistol gleamed. Stop them, he roared. But before he could fire, one of the cellar windows shattered. An arm made of ash and bone reached out, seizing Marcus Fanning by the leg. He screamed as he was dragged down, clawing at the ground. His fingernails tore away, leaving bloody streaks on the porch. The others froze, horror-struck. No, Pelham shouted. Close it. Seal the door. But it was too late. More hands pushed through. Dozens. The cellar was no longer holding the dead, it was spitting them out. Ezekiel pulled Catherine toward the stables. We need a horse. But the moment they reached the yard, every animal screamed, thrashing against stalls. Their eyes rolled white, foam flying from their mouths. Whatever curse lived in the ledger was poisoning even beasts. Catherine gasped. We can't run. The book wants us here. Ezekiel turned, fury burning in him. Then we fight. For Sarah. For Benjamin. For Ruth. We end this tonight. He ripped a broken tool handle from the stable wall, gripping it like a weapon. Catherine opened the ledger again, pages fluttering in the dark wind. The names glowed brighter, each one pulsing like a heartbeat. She lifted her face, shouting into the night. If you want us, then take us. But we will not bow. The earth cracked. The great house of Cypress Grove groaned, beams splintering, shutters slamming. The brethren screamed as the dead clawed their way out, dragging men down into the soil itself. And above it all, the ledger's pages turned faster, until a single word formed across the parchment in blood-red ink. Consecrated. Ezekiel pulled Catherine close as the plantation burned and buckled around them. This isn't the end, he whispered. Catherine's eyes gleamed with tears and firelight. No, it's only the beginning. Right finger to be continued in Part 10, The Final Reckoning. Do you want Part 10 to end as a full supernatural collapse, the ledger consuming the brethren, Catherine, and Ezekiel in fire and ghosts, or a revenge resolution they escape, but scarred, with the ledger as a cursed weapon? Part 10, The Final Reckoning. The night Cypress Grove fell, no one ever forgot. By dawn, the great plantation house was nothing more than a smoldering skeleton, its white columns collapsed, its roof a blackened ribcage against the gray sky. Smoke curled upward like prayers the heavens refused to hear. But the real horror wasn't the fire. It was the silence. Because inside that silence, you could still hear whispers if you stood too close, the whispers of men who had once called themselves masters, judges, preachers. Now their voices were thin, stretched, pulled into the earth beneath the ruins. The ledger had taken them. Catherine and Ezekiel had survived the night by inches. They lay in the cane fields when the house collapsed, the burning heat licking their faces, the voices of the dead shrieking around them. Catherine clutched the ledger to her chest, as though the cursed book was the only thing keeping her heart beating. Ezekiel turned his face from the blaze, whispering the names of his wife and children like a prayer. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. When the sun broke the horizon, Catherine stirred. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes were clear. Clearer than they had ever been. It's done, she said. But Ezekiel shook his head. No, done would mean peace. Look at us. Look at this. He pointed to the ruins. There is no peace here. Only payment. They staggered back toward the ruins. The air was still blistering, ash floating like snow. Ezekiel kicked aside a fallen beam. Beneath it, something moved. Not a man, what was left of one. Judge Pelham's face, twisted in agony, eyes sunken, skin gray. His lips moved soundlessly, but the ledger pulsed in Catherine's arms, and she heard his voice inside her skull. Free me. In God's name, free me. Catherine stared down at him, trembling. For years this man had called her mad, locked her away, poisoned her life. Now he begged like a child. Her voice was ice. There is no God here, Judge. And the earth swallowed him whole. By midday, the plantation grounds were crawling with survivors, slaves from the fields, neighbors drawn by the smoke, soldiers riding in from nearby towns. They found no trace of the brethren. But they found Catherine and Ezekiel. What happened here? A soldier demanded, his eyes darting nervously over the ruins. Ezekiel stepped forward before Catherine could speak. The house caught fire. The masters, they didn't get out. The soldier frowned. All of them, Ezekiel said. His voice held no tremor. He had learned long ago how to tell a lie that sounded like truth. The soldiers glanced at one another, uneasy. No man wanted to dig through that wreckage. Not when the air reeked not only of smoke but of something fouler, sulfur, decay, damnation. By nightfall, they left. That left only the freed people. Men and women who had lived their lives under Rutledge's whip stood at the edge of the ruins, not daring to come closer. They looked to Ezekiel. What now? One asked. Where do we go? Ezekiel felt the weight of their eyes. For years he had dreamed only of revenge. Now vengeance lay buried in the earth. What came after was something he had not planned for. Before he could answer, Catherine spoke. You go where you wish. You are free. The word fell like thunder. Free. Some wept. Some laughed. Some simply stared, unable to believe it. Ezekiel watched Catherine as she stood with the ledger in her arms, her body weak but her voice strong. For the first time, he understood she was not just her father's victim. She was her own force. But freedom came with shadows. That night, as the former slaves gathered their few belongings and prepared to leave Cypress Grove forever, Ezekiel found Catherine by the ruins. She was staring at the ledger, her fingers tracing the names that still glowed faintly on its pages. They're not gone, she whispered. Not really. The brethren live in these pages now. Bound to it. Ezekiel knelt beside her. Then we burn it. Tonight. She looked at him with something like fear. No, fire won't touch it. I tried. Then bury it, and it will only wait for the next hand to dig it up. Don't you see, Ezekiel? This book doesn't belong to them. It belongs to us, to everyone they hurt. It holds their names, their power, their chains. We can use it. Her voice grew urgent. What if this ledger could not just punish the brethren, but every man like them? Every master, every butcher, every hypocrite who wears God's name while killing his children. Wouldn't you use it? Ezekiel stared at her. The firelight flickered across her face, making her look both holy and damned. His heart said yes. His soul whispered no. At dawn, the freed people left. They carried nothing of the plantation but the scars on their backs and the memory of fire. Ezekiel stood among them, watching the road stretch wide before them. But Catherine stayed. She sat on the ruins, the ledger in her lap, her eyes distant. Go, she told him. Your family waits for you in heaven. Find peace while you can. But I cannot leave. I am bound. The ledger wants me, and I want it. Ezekiel's throat tightened. He wanted to drag her with him. To free her as he had freed himself. But he knew better. Some souls could not walk away from their ghosts. So he left. Years later, whispers spread through South Carolina. Of a ruined plantation where no birds sang. Of a woman with black hair and burning eyes who lived among the ashes. Of a book that wrote men's names in blood before death came for them. They called her, the widow of Cypress Grove. Some said she was a witch. Some said a saint. Others swore she was death itself, wearing flesh. But Ezekiel knew the truth. Catherine Rutledge had chosen her vengeance over her freedom. And the ledger still turned its pages. Movie camera. This ends our 10-part horror saga of The Devil's Ledger. If you enjoyed this chilling journey through history and horror, don't forget. Right finger like this video to support the story. Right finger share it with someone who loves Gothic horror and supernatural revenge tales. Right finger comment below, what would you have done with the ledger, destroyed it, or used it? Right finger, and most of all, subscribe for more terrifying stories like this one. Because sometimes, history doesn't rest in peace, it waits.